Oh, hey, Brad. Hello, everyone,
Hey,
and
how's it going?
good. So good to see you, and so good to see you all. Thank you so much for joining us for the next episode of Calling for Change. This is episode 7, and this program is presented by Lincoln Calling and Civic Nebraska. My name is Erin Poor. I work for Lincoln Calling, and I'm joined by Brad Christian-Sallis of Civic Nebraska. How are you doing, Brad?
Oh, good. I'm good, Aaron. And as you know, I'm very excited because it's GOTV time and people are already voting right now. So I know one of the things me and you discussed was how can we help people as they are casting their ballots with that process. So this episode, we're going to focus on a tool that Civic Nebraska has called Decoding the Ballot. It's a really awesome resource. And joining us to kind of decode the ballot and break everything down is my amazing coworker, Heather Engdahl.
Oh,
Hey, Heather, welcome.
thank you for having me. It's so good to be here with you all.
Oh, it's so great to have you back, both of you in one virtual room. We are so lucky. So thank you both so much. I know that it is wild times for both of you. So, as people who work in voting rights and voting field workers, can you tell us a little bit about what does your life look like? What's your daily life?
For me, I know we're making a lot of phone calls, trying to get out to events when possible, when we have outdoor events, and really just taking a lot of time for calls with colleague partners and the community. What about you, Brad?
Oh man, it's very busy. Definitely doing yeah, all those events, trying to be in the community as much as we can while being safe, and just really even just talking to the people who are in my social network and community, just making sure that they're registered to vote, that they kind of have created their plan for voting, and that they kind of have that basic knowledge on what's going to be on the ballot beyond the presidential election, because a lot of people get that's all the news will cover, so that's all they'll really know. So just trying to make sure everyone I know knows everything that they're going to have a chance to use their voice and their vote to make a difference on.
Absolutely. And I feel like Civic Nebraska is so phenomenal in just the diversity of resources that y'all create for people year round. But this particular resource that we're going to be diving into today, Decoding the Ballot, I think is so vital. So, as always, please go and visit Civic Nebraska's website, civicnebraska.org. And you can just Google decoding the ballot and look up that 2020 general election document. It's a beautiful website, great web design, plus super accessible documents. So head over there, but also stick around for this conversation. So, my question to you, I know, Brad, you just mentioned that a lot of times the news covers these presidential elections, and that's where it stops. So, tell us a little bit more about why y'all created this particular resource, why it's so important that people, prepare even further for that ballot.
Definitely. Well, the first reason is just that there's never enough nonpartisan resources for people where they're just getting facts and not trying to be influenced to vote one way or the other. But another big reason is just because there's so many things on the ballot that even myself, if I don't take the time to research it and figure out what that exact position is, I don't even know because so many of these things only come up every, 4 years. For me, this is only my third presidential election being able to vote. And so it seems like sometimes there's things I've never even heard of, even still. And so when those things pop up on the ballot, if you kind of, even if you don't necessarily know who your candidate is yet, but you still have time to do that research, You want to be able to say, is this person like actually trying to tell me how they're going to do the job I'm electing them for? Because a lot of people will talk about things as if they were going to be president or something, but the actual responsibilities of that job don't really apply. So I think that's a huge reason why it's so important, is that you want to know that the candidate you're going to support really understands the job and is at least taking the time to read that job description. So when you are voting, you're making that decision based on what they can actually do and what they can do for you.
Yes, so important. And I feel like that was kind of one of the first reasons why we even started calling for change. We first really wanted to zero in on these local issues, and we were talking about city council, and we even had Councilman Benny Shobe on here saying, I wish people knew more about what we did, because we have folks coming to us with these concerns and we have no power over those particular things. So this resource, letting people know exactly what that job is and what that person is going to be elected to do, I think is so valuable. Heather, anything else you want to add to that?
Definitely echo that 100%. I know for myself, this is only my second presidential election, and I really wasn't well informed the last time around on all of the other down ballot races and things that I voted on. So I'm just really happy to be involved now, to be informed, and to be sharing that and help others do the same. It definitely makes the world of a difference to feel like you know exactly what you're voting on, and to be able to know in advance not only the candidates, but have an educated vote that you plan to cast. So definitely.
Yeah, and one thing going off of that is I always encourage people to really pair Decoding the Ballot with the League of Women Voters Vote 411, because that way you'll have a nonpartisan take on the candidates' beliefs and their stances, and then you'll have a nonpartisan take on what the job is and what they're supposed to do. And I think the two of those go really well together to really help voters be informed, especially right now with so many people being able and taking part in vote by mail, where they can really take the time to just research it, and you don't have that pressure of like feeling like you're in the ballot box and like, oh shoot, I forgot to look up this thing. What do I mark? Do I leave it blank, or do I vote for somebody and not really know? So I think pairing those two resources along with just voting by mail is going to make for a great voter experience.
Totally. And I'm so grateful for, was it Candide that came on from the League of Women Voters, who shared with us so much work that amazing organization is doing and introduced that resource to us. So, okay, so we've got the Decoding the Ballot from Civic Nebraska, League of Women Voters, Vote 411. And Heather, you had another great resource that you wanted us to know about too.
Yeah, so this is a less localized resource, but it's just ballotpedia.org. And what it is a sample ballot lookup. So you're able to put in your address and see the breakdown of what you'll be voting on your ballot. And so I find this really helpful and did it. I vote in Omaha, but also I looked up Lincoln just to kind of get a feel for the different things we vote on in the two different cities, to be able to come to the call kind of prepared on that. So yeah, I highly recommend that. It's really useful. You can just put in the address and then see all the different things that you'll be voting on.
Awesome.
Yeah, and that's a really useful tool. One of the things about Nebraska is we have one of the highest numbers of like different ballots across the state, because there's just so many like different combinations of things that people end up voting on. So that's one thing I've always found really interesting, of like in the country, we have one of the highest combinations of different ballots that people will be getting.
That's awesome. I had no idea. So tell us a little bit about, and this you'll see it if audience members are going to go visit Civic Nebraska's Decoding the Ballot resource. But talk to us about, we're going to dive into a conversation about what is going to be on the ballot. But so what are we going to be talking about tonight? Like, which ballots are we going to be talking about?
So a lot of the things we'll be going over tonight will be things that'll be across all ballots. So there's your federal offices that will be across all ballots. There's your constitutional amendments and your ballot initiatives. And those are all things that will go across all ballots. Now, there's some things that'll just be particular to which county, city, even like down to which voting precinct you live in. So we're mostly, going to hit on those federal things, and then especially some of the amendments and ballot initiatives that will be up this year.
Awesome. So, well, let's get into it. I mean, of course, we know about the presidential election. If you at all glance at the news, you realize that's all we're talking about these days. But let's look further down that ballot and what are some of these offices that we need to know about?
Well, one of the big ones that I always think is super important is judges, making sure people are aware that judges will be up to vote, or you vote to basically retain judges. So you don't pick new judges, but if you vote to retain them, they stay on the court. But if you don't vote to retain them, then somebody new will be appointed. So that's one that I think is super, super important, is the judges.
Definitely agree. I'd also throw out kind of on the state level, the state senator, but also Board of Education, and things at that level. So definitely agree on the judges. So too, I think just really knowing that it's more than the presidential race and that it's easy to get caught up in the hype of that, but knowing that these other things really do affect our daily lives. And so I'd also
absolutely. And the judges, the judiciary, that to me is sometimes the most mystifying part of the ballot, especially because I often don't know anything about these people. And I don't really know where to find out about their record, about their decisions, what they've been involved in. So it's really difficult for me to understand what is at stake with these votes to either retain or not retain. So do y'all have any advice about that? Like how can we learn about these judges, and how can we be informed in the decisions that we make regarding judges in Nebraska?
Heather, you want to take this one?
I expected you to have a solid resource, Brad. What would you say?
No, I do. I was going to let you go first, though.
Thank you. But you got it.
Okay. So my number one resource for this is actually my mom, because she's an attorney. So I always text her and say, "Hey, Mom, is this judge any good?" But for everybody who can't just text my mom on election day, one group that I know does a lot of great work around judges that I've worked with before through Civic Nebraska is Courts Matter, which is so that's probably would be my number one resource for everyone else, is to use Courts Matter. And then I'd have to double check, but there may be information on judges on the Vote 411 with the League of Women Voters as well. But judges are a tough one. But luckily, like Heather was showing, there is that sample ballot. So you can look up your ballot, see which judges there's going to be, and then take some time to try and just look up their names, see what comes up. I think this is definitely something people, especially coming out of the summer we just had, are a lot more attuned to and wanting to know. And a lot of that is not really set up for transparency. So that's one of the things that we all need to continue to push for, is more transparency around that. But if for a resource that's more immediate, I would use Courts Matter, or just text me and I'll ask my mom for you.
Yes, I really think we should have your mom on as a guest, because she sounds phenomenal, and I feel like she has imparted so much wisdom on you. I feel like she could help the rest of us a bit, but it sounds like she's doing some good work, so we'll leave her to it. But maybe slide the idea in there. Yeah, okay. So speaking about judges, I want to stay with this a little bit more, again, because I find this topic to be mystifying and kind of like difficult. And your point about a lack of transparency on this, I think is a really important point for us to be thinking about. And as a person who does a lot of imagining about what a more democratic future looks like, Brad, I'm curious, and Heather as well, what would a more transparent judiciary look like? What would these resources look like? Or how would a voter, or just a person living in this state, in this country, how would they better learn about judges in your future, your ideal future?
Am I going first again on this one, Heather?
Yeah, I thought you had the judges on lock.
I don't know that I have. I definitely don't have it on lock. I don't know if I have a perfect way of imagining it, but I do think it would be similar to what we see in some states, just around ballot language and making things really easy for people to understand. And really making our voting system something that more is favored towards voters and their ease. And one thing I know, I think it's Colorado, has like a really cool thing, but it's like a plain language provision where everything on the ballot just has to be like plain language, like anyone can understand it without having to question, like, what am I voting for? And so when I think about like all the great resources we have out there, like Vote 411, to me, like, I think about what if, like, how Vote 411 has nonpartisan descriptions of the candidates. What would it look like to have that for candidates and for judges? Like, and I have no idea if that's something that would even be possible or allowable, but I just think anything that would really get more information into the hands of voters without putting it on the voters. Our job, when we think about what the government should be doing in elections, it should be treating it like any other business, where you want to make the process as great and as seamless and as easy for the customer as possible. So I think anything that pushes it more in that direction would be the best thing. But really taking the responsibility off of the voters and getting out of the mentality like, well, where do you have to go to find out this information? But instead, like, let's do things we can to get the information to people without them having to take the extra step.
Definitely. I would add to that too, with just in general, I think knowing all of these different positions which we elect is in itself very important to know. I know before the first time I voted, I didn't realize that we elected judges. And in the same way, there's a lot of other positions where when they're our elected official, they should be working for us, and representing us in a way that's consistent with their values, the community values, et cetera. And so I think another way of looking at kind of the future, if we could get to more transparency, it would also be kind of more public records available to really see each elected official, no matter the office, kind of their track record, their statements made, their rulings made, their any patterns, things like that. I think that's also something that I envision when I think of transparency. and a very, very tangible way to keep all the elected officials held accountable, especially at a time where we really want to be involved in all of this, knowing that we have the option to be involved in all of this and electing these folks. So.
Oh, totally. And yeah, I love what both of you are saying, that enhanced transparency, taking the responsibility off the shoulders of the voters and just having these resources available for people, having records more available. It makes me think about a conversation I was listening to earlier today on the All My Relations podcast. Definitely recommend that one. They just had a new podcast come out talking about the native vote, and talking about the ways in which Indigenous people have historically had their vote suppressed, but also the ways in which Indigenous activists have come together to really push against that suppression and make some really amazing things happen in the world of voting and winning more power in the U.S. government. But one thing that they said too today is that not only do we need to remember this idea that these are folks that work for us, but they applied that Indigenous idea of being in good relation. And we need to be thinking about these people that we're voting for as people that we can have relationships with. So, how can we be in relation with these folks? And let's think through that by looking at their records, by looking at their platforms and understanding what our relationship will be to these folks once they are elected to office. Okay, maybe this is my last question about judges, maybe not, I don't know. But I want to talk about how, the Nebraska Supreme Court impacted this year's ballot. And some of us may know about this, some of us may not, but Brad, can you tell us a little bit about the ballot initiative that was going to be on the ballot, but that was not put on the ballot because of a decision made by the Nebraska Supreme Court?
Yeah, so the one that was going to be on the ballot was medical marijuana. There were enough signatures collected, enough Nebraskans wanted to have their voice heard to really be that other house. Since we do have that unicameral, the people are supposed to be the other house. And so there were enough signatures collected for that issue to be on the ballot and to be voted on by Nebraskans. But what the court ruled was that it went beyond a single subject. And that's one of the requirements for ballot initiatives in our state, is that they can only have one subject. And I don't know, I'm far from an attorney, so I couldn't really go into details on why the court ruled that the language was beyond one subject. I didn't get that from reading it, but again, I'm not an attorney, but that's one of the things that is really tough about ballot initiatives, is that it does have to be limited to a single subject, which can make it tough, and it can also kind of introduce that influence of judges and how they view a subject, and whether they think, this is all one thing or think it's individual things. So these are separate subjects. So that's why it's important to, be looking at not who you're electing as a judge, because we don't get to elect our judges, but who we're retaining, and making sure, like Heather was saying, what is their track record? Do you agree with the decisions they've made, or do you not agree? Because that is the thing we have here in Nebraska, is that every 3 years, judges have to be retained. It's not like the Supreme Court where they're there for life no matter what. And so that's something that I think people should really pay attention to. It's just that ability that if there's judges who you see are constantly going against the things you believe, you do have that chance to vote to remove them from office.
Right. And beyond the opportunity to vote to remove someone from office, which is an important power to wield, we also are electing the people who appoint the judges. So can you tell us, either one of you, I know when we look at, the different judges that are up for retention, the judicial retention list, we have the Nebraska Supreme Court, and the Nebraska Supreme Court is appointed by whom?
The governor.
The governor. Okay. And we don't have, the governor is not up for election this year, but the governor's office will be up for election. Is it next year or the year after?
It will be, it was 2018, so 2022. Yeah. So
okay.
Not next year, the year after.
Soon. So that is another way, not necessarily on the 2020 ballot, but on the 2022 ballot, we'll be able to appoint a new person. We'll be able to elect a new person who appoints judges, potentially. So that's just another way that you can think about your influence on the judiciary. I also, I'm looking at, and feel free to just be like, go look this up yourself, Aaron. But I see that we also have the Nebraska Court of Appeals judge. Do you know who appoints those judges?
That one is also the governor.
How many of these judiciary appointments does the governor make?
I would have to double check. I believe he makes most or all of them, but I know for sure the Supreme Court and the Court of Appeals. Heather, do you know with the other ones?
I had to unmute myself. Sorry. I don't know about the other ones. I know those two for sure are appointed by the governor. I think when you get localized down to the county, I don't believe it's appointed by the governor, but we can definitely check into that for you, Aaron.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, maybe we can have that info on Decoding the Ballot Part 2. Because yeah, that's, like I said, the judicial branch is, that one. I mean, I guess it's like, it is, well, I guess when you think about like the Supreme Court of the United States, that is the non-democratic part of the branch of the government, and meaning that we don't necessarily have that vote directly to influence it. But on other benches, we do have a degree of that democratic input. So I definitely want to encourage everyone to really exercise that power. Maybe we could spend a little bit more time talking about some of the other state offices and local offices. I know that the Decoding the Ballot resource is really that wealth of information, and I cannot emphasize enough how much y'all should go and visit civicnebraska.org and find that 2020 general election Decoding the Ballot. If you have Facebook, I'll go ahead and drop this resource into the event page for tonight's Calling for Change, and we'll probably post links to it through our socials as well. But Brad and Heather, are there any state offices that you want to kind of highlight that maybe you receive questions about when you're out in the field talking to voters?
I think the most questions about is actually a federal office, but the senator race for U.S. Senate. So I think that's when I get asked about the most. What about you, Brad?
I don't know if it's the one I get asked about the most, but the one I find the most interesting is Public Service Commission, because that is something, until I actually was involved helping a candidate who was running for it a couple of years ago, who's one of my close friends now. I had no idea like the reach of it and like how much power was in the Public Service Commission. Like, but really the Public Service Commission, it handles, pipelines. So when we're thinking about like the Keystone and XL and all of that, they vote on that. They do like and handle like your 911 service and the contracts with that, and like railroad safety. It's just like it's this huge like thing that like covers such a variety of stuff. And I had no idea about it. I don't really think most people um, really are like paying attention to their public service commission races, but it's one of what at least in my opinion, one of the most like powerful bodies of our state government, and also the people who serve on that get paid $75,000 a year, and it's a 6-year term, so it's really like electing like a senator. And it's just something not enough people are paying attention to. So that's one that I always think people should pay attention to. Not everyone will have their public service commissioner up for election this year, but I think that's one. Look at your ballot, look at that sample ballot, like Heather kind of talked about, and find out if you do, because there's a lot of power in that position, and it gets really, really, really overlooked.
Wow. Okay, y'all, that is the Public Service Commissioner. Now, I need a clarification. Is this one person or a body of people?
It's a body. I would have to check how many people are on it.
Okay.
I think it's 5. But yeah, it's a body. A lot of those decisions, like the Keystone XL pipeline, that's the body here in Nebraska that decides that, that decided that. And so there's just so much power. They do a lot with just telecommunications as well, and what's happening in our state with that. There's really a lot of influence there that kind of gets overlooked, or at least it did by me, until I really had a chance to just get more involved and become more educated on it. So that's one I would definitely highlight for people.
Thank you. I super appreciate that, because, yeah, I had no idea. I really didn't. Again, I always like, oh, I have a great voting report card. I'm great at this. But no, you don't know what you don't know. Okay, so everyone drop the ego, visit civicnebraska.org and find that Decoding the Ballot and get to know what these offices are, get to know what these bodies are that make these huge decisions about our state and about our land, about our water, our connectivity, all of these things. So get informed. I have a question too. I'm looking at the state offices and I see that the State Board of Education is an office that some folks will be able to vote on. So tell me a little bit about that body. What are some of their responsibilities?
Yeah, so this is one I find really interesting, and that I've actually been learning more about, especially as we really tune into the curriculum and the standards of our public schools. And so when I was first learning about this office, learning about the standardized testing, I think that's something that people can kind of recognize the name of those practices, and just recognizing all of the work over time that folks have been doing to try to make policies more equitable and more representative in the curriculum that we're sharing with our children, but also how we're shaping the youth. And so I would say also it is like the State Board of Education. And so they appoint the commissioner for the Department of Education. And so when we're thinking about federal education programs, so I'm thinking about maybe Pell Grants. I don't know that they have much sway in it, but just kind of thinking of all those different responsibilities that the Department of Education and Board of Education would then facilitate.
Nice. Great. Maybe we could shift over briefly to the local offices, and if y'all want to shout out any of those offices that you feel are often overlooked but really are quite important for us to know about. Brad, do you want to start?
Oh man. Yeah, so I'll start. This one is kind of tough because me being an Omaha person, like I'm so invested in like what's happening in Omaha with local offices. And so for us, we won't be able to vote on like mayor and city council and things like that until 2021. But there are other important offices. There's like the utilities district, MUD is up for election, which is like huge. Like everybody gets that bill in the whole city of Omaha. And so when you think about how elections affect us and really make a difference in our lives, like everybody's getting that bill. So if you want, to be able to have an influence on how much you're paying, what type of resources that we're using when it comes to our gas, and thinking about how our drinking water is coming to us and all that, like that's your chance to vote on it. There's nothing bigger than just voting on those simple things. And those are the things that like you think about monthly, the thing you get a bill for monthly, the water you drink, you think about daily, all the time. And like we've seen, when things go wrong with stuff like that, like people notice, and it's a huge difference. But you don't want to wait to pay attention to things like that until you're in a situation like what happened up in Flint, Michigan. Like you want to make sure you're paying attention to all these offices that affect you in these different ways all the time, so that you're constantly holding your elected officials accountable, and so that you're able to protect yourself, protect your family, and maybe have a lower bill.
Awesome.
Definitely. I was just going to add one too. It's actually really similar to the one that Brad described, but it's called the Natural Resources District Board of Directors. And so this is also dealing with like groundwater and infrastructure development, but also has a little bit to do with our taxes, how much comes out of the taxes for those resources. And so I always think those are interesting to learn about. I actually hadn't heard about that one, so I just wanted to kind of share it because it was a learning moment for me. And I could imagine how impactful this office could be. And so with that, I think really just acknowledging it's a learning moment for all of us. And so there's some that we literally may not have known existed, and that's okay.
Totally. So as we all know, water is life. Y'all care about water. I know you do. So care about these offices. I mean, I want to shout out, I just want to say thank you to both of you. This conversation isn't over with yet, but I just want to say thank you for bringing our attentions to that, because I didn't realize what was at stake here. So thank you. Now let's shift to another section of the ballot and let's talk about constitutional amendments. We do have to kind of condense our conversation here, so maybe we can just talk about one of them, unless you want to briefly talk about both of them. But Brad, what do you got?
So I will talk about one of the two amendments that'll be on our Constitution, which is the fact that Nebraskans will have a chance to get slavery out of our Constitution, and to actually ban slavery without any exceptions. So where this kind of comes from is when we passed the 13th Amendment on a federal level, and kind of got rid of slavery on a state level, we left an exception where slavery is still allowed as punishment for a crime. So that's why, for so many years, we saw systems like convict leasing, where we saw people who had committed a crime really be just exploited. And it's why we still are able to see so much exploitation happening today, especially in the Black community. So this is something that you wouldn't think we would have to vote on. You wouldn't think that like slavery would still be in our Constitution, but it is. It's in our state Constitution, and it's still in our federal Constitution. There is that exception for slavery as a punishment for a crime. And while it seems like, okay, that could never happen, it's totally legal that people could start being put into the same type of, slavery that we think of when we think of slavery, not even like a modified form, but it would be totally legal to go back to just like that first image when you think of slavery, where Black people are totally property. That's still legal if you commit a crime. And so that's something that will be on the ballot. And so that's something that also really comes back to that why, having plain language type things is really going to be important as we want to see people really be able to have an impact and an influence on their democracy, because not understanding that question could mean, you end up supporting slavery when you don't want to. And what I would say is that it's not something that's guaranteed to pass. There was a similar initiative in Colorado, where it was just like kind of here in Nebraska, where it passed unanimously through their legislature, and then it failed by 1%. And kind of what a lot of people talked about was they didn't know exactly what they were voting on. And it failed by that 1%. And that wasn't like in like way back in the like 60s or 70s or anything like that. That was in 2016 in Colorado, the state over. So it just goes back to why it's so important to know what's on your ballot, and really have taken the time to educate yourself on how you want to vote on it. Because I'm sure there's a lot of people in Nebraska who don't realize it's on the ballot, and maybe will see that question and be confused by the language of it, or be kind of just thrown off and just be like, oh, I don't need to worry about this, or something like that, because that's what we saw, similarly happen in Colorado. So it's really just important that you know everything you're voting on and you're kind of prepared for what you're going to vote on, because it could be you're voting on something like whether or not we're going to continue to have an exception for having slavery in the state of Nebraska. So everything on your ballot makes a really big difference. And that's why it's so important to vote. A lot of times it's really easy for people to get turned off by the, just the super argumentative partisan nature of what's going on. But like we talked about earlier, the water you're drinking is on your ballot. Whether or not we're allowing exceptions for slavery is on the ballot. There's so many things that are on the ballot. So even if you're not like a huge fan of a presidential candidate, like still make sure you get registered to vote, still vote, because there's so many important things. And when people say, oh, my vote doesn't make a difference, like with things like this is where it truly will make a difference. And you'll be able to see how your vote impacts your life and others' lives and the lives of your community and other communities that you care about.
Absolutely. Extremely well said, Brad. Thank you. Can you all speak about the process of how a constitutional amendment appears on our ballot?
Yeah, so there are two ways. And the way you'll see it kind of broken down on our Decoding the Ballot document, it is by ballot initiatives and then constitutional amendments. And ballot initiatives can be constitutional amendments, but they aren't always necessarily that way. But how things end up on the ballot is you can either collect signatures, a group can come together, say, hey, we want to see this happen in Nebraska. We want to change this piece of the Constitution, or it doesn't even necessarily need to be a constitutional change. It can just be, I want to change this law or that law, and you can collect enough signatures across the state so it's geographically diverse. And then once you have enough signatures, if the courts let it go through, that ends up on the ballot. The other way something that can end up on our ballot is the legislature can send it straight to the people. So if it's an issue, sometimes where they'll either need to change the actual constitution, so it has to come to us, or if it's more of a statute type thing, but they want to say, hey, let's let the people make the decision on this, they can pass it, and then it will be added to our ballot.
Awesome. So just to kind of reiterate what you just said, a group of people can come together around an issue that's important to them and say, we want to make this happen. Maybe they've already exhausted the legislative option. Maybe they don't want to go down that path, but this path of collecting signatures to, reach a particular threshold to get something on the ballot, that is a valid way of seeing change in your community, that kind of consensus building through the signature getting process. Is that what I'm hearing? Okay.
Definitely. It's
okay. And
it's a great
go
tool
ahead.
for advocacy. And I would just add, it's not only on the state level, but on a lot of local levels, there is the option to be able to collect signatures for things to make a difference and to be able to change either statutes and things like that. So definitely take the time. If there's something you really want to see change and your elected officials aren't doing it, use those tools. Nebraska is really unique in that way, because when we got the unicameral and a lot of the nonpartisan unique things about Nebraska, like splitting the electoral college, it was really part of a movement to give more power to the people. So Nebraskans, we have a lot of power that other people in other states don't always necessarily have. But that power is wasted if we don't use it.
Great point.
One thing I was going to add too, just to uplift, I know we're getting close on time, but with the other initiatives on there, I wanted to uplift the payday lender interest rate cap initiative. And so there was a lot of work done, a lot of advocacy done. We were seeing interest rates over 100%, 200%. That's insane. And so this initiative would actually limit the interest charge for payday lending to 36%. And so that's a huge thing that will be on the ballot, that a lot of work was done around that issue, because a lot of people came together and recognized that it was an issue, and it was a very predatory practice going on. And so just wanted to uplift that while we're still here, and again, to uplift and echo the messages you both were just sharing.
Oh, absolutely, Heather. And I want to thank you for highlighting that in this particular conversation. Brad and I are going to have everyone reassemble in 2 weeks for Calling for a Change episode 8, which is Decoding the Ballot Part 2. And we are going to dive very deeply into these ballot initiatives. So, but thank you for that little teaser, because yeah, exactly like what you said, there are extremely predatory practices in this particular situation involving payday lending that we can have a say in. And so let's come back together on that particular topic, and we'll look at some of the other ballot initiatives. We'll dive deeper into the process of how these ballot initiatives appear on our ballots. I want to say to our audiences listening on Facebook and YouTube right now, if you have any questions, go ahead and just drop those into the comments bars, and we will get those over to Brad and Heather. We did have a listener, Anna, who asked about judges and what happens if they don't get, or if they get voted out. But we kind of addressed that when we talked about who actually appoints the judges. But if y'all have any other questions about that, please shout them out in the comments. Is there anything else, just to kind of hover on this topic of the constitutional amendment, especially the constitutional amendment to propose eliminating slavery or involuntary servitude? Brad, is there anything else that you want to share on that particular amendment that you feel would be helpful for folks to know going into the polls?
I would just tell people to really realize that whether something is legal or not makes a huge difference. Whether something is allowed makes a huge difference. Constitutions are not just legal documents in that way, but they're also moral documents. And I can't necessarily say in my Civic Nebraska nonpartisan role, like how people should vote. But what I would say is that it's really painful and really just like hurtful for me as a Black man, a Black American, to realize that that there's any exception for slavery, that's something that we would allow if somebody does something. I don't think there's anything in the world anyone could do that would make that okay. And so that's what's so powerful about us being able to vote and use our voices. Nebraskans right now can make a decision on that. And this is not something that can really be avoided. Either way, a decision will be made on that by Nebraskan voters. So, you know, I want us to make the right decision. I don't want to wake up a couple days after the election, because I'm gonna sleep for a couple of days once this is all over, and find out that there's still slavery allowed in our state. But that's the thing that makes elections so powerful, is that it will really be up to the people what all we want and what we decide. And if people get out and vote, things will be the way they think it should be. And if people sit at home, things could very well not look the way people want it to look. So as much as I do believe that we need to make everything about the voting process easier and more convenient for voters, at the same time, it is right now, the system is the way it is, and Nebraskan voters will need to get out and make the decisions on these things. And so they'll have to, you know, make sure they register by the deadline. They're going to vote by mail, get their vote by mail request in, make sure they vote by mail once they have their ballot, that they sign their envelope so that their vote will be counted and there can't be any issues there. If they're going to mail it back, make sure they mail it back with plenty of time. If they're not going to mail it back, make sure they get their ballot to a drop box. If they want to go in person, make sure they go to vote, make sure they know where their polling place is, make sure they have a plan. And just know that Civic Nebraska, me, Heather, John, our whole team at Civic Nebraska is going to be there to help you as voters, to help you make your decision in the way you want to, and make sure you're able to use your right to vote. We'll have our election protection program. I do want to shout that out. We always need more people to help out with the election protection program, to get involved, to be poll observers, to make sure no one is being turned away. Make sure everyone has that kind of on the ground resource. So if they show up to the wrong polling place, you can help them get to the right polling place. All those things make a huge difference, and all those things will determine how Nebraska ends up looking, how our country ends up looking, and what decisions are being made. So definitely help out with election protection if you can. Definitely vote if you can. If you can't vote, if you're not a citizen, if you're not going to be 18 by the election, get others you know to vote. Help educate them on what's going to be on the ballot. Help educate them on the importance of the different offices. Let them know how you would vote if you could vote, and ask them to, be a voice for you, because that's what our vote really is. It is our voice. So don't feel like even if you can't vote, you don't have a way to impact the system. And if you can vote, don't just stop there. There's so many other things you can do to help other people's voices be lifted up as well.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Brad, for shouting out all that important information and for telling us about that voter protection, or the program where you can have folks actually at the polls as resources. We're almost out of time for tonight. Heather, I want to give you the last word here. What do you want to share before we have to wrap up for this evening?
Yes, thank you. And thank you to both of you for having this discussion and having this platform here that we have. I really want to lift up that, again, to reiterate that we vote on more than just the political partisan ads that we might see and hear about more frequently. And so just, again, driving home that fact that, I understand it's valid if you're annoyed with the partisan, attacks, but there's so much more that's on the ballot, and they're very important things like we've discussed tonight. They should be no-brainers, in my opinion, and it's surprising that we still have to take this step and get it amended on the Constitution, but that's the step that we will take then. So in that way, I would just support everybody to, again, look through all of these different things that are on the ballot. If you're able to look up your sample ballot or get your ballot in the mail, whichever one you prefer, just to be able to see who your options are and all of the different things that you're voting on, to really make that count the most. And thank you again for having me here. And thanks to everybody watching. Again, just to lift up again, don't hesitate to reach out to us if you have any questions at all. I'm definitely here to help. Everybody vote.
Yes. Thank you so much, Heather, for joining us in this conversation. Brad, as always, it's so wonderful to have you as a co-host and expert. Everyone, do not be shy. Reach out to Civic Nebraska if you have any questions. You want to feel like you want to be more involved, go and support their efforts on Election Day at the polls, civicnebraska.org. Visit their Decoding the Ballot resource. Go check out League of Women Voters Omaha and see their Vote 411 resource, and Ballotpedia will give you an opportunity to know what is exactly on your ballot in your location ahead of the election. So I want to say thank you to everyone. Come back for Decoding the Ballot Part 2. It's going to be on October 27th at 6 p.m. On Lincoln Callings Facebook Live and YouTube. So thank you, everyone, so much. Have a great night. Take care, everyone. Be safe out there.
Have a good one, Aaron. Good seeing you, Heather.
Bye.